Greetings and welcome. Infosecurity Europe 2018. Another live webinar to you. Please switch off your phones. If there is a fire, obviously go and save yourself first. But after that, we've got an interesting discussion on today. My name is Amar. I'm going to introduce the panelists very, very soon. But I leave you, or rather I started with an interesting thought. And that is, if you're flying in a plane, or not on a plane, but in a plane, and most modern planes have internet connectivity, the question you need to ask your CEO and board, if they're on the plane with you, if the plane does get hacked, are you going to be able to, and breached, are you going to be able to detect it in 20 seconds and recover in 20 seconds, or would you want to take 30 or 40 minutes to recover and respond? So I'll leave that answer with you, but I'm going to go to the respected panelists very soon and introduce them. I'm going to start with Giampiero Nanni from Symantec, and then we've got Darren Thomson, again from Symantec, and George Patsis from Obrela. If we start with you, just a brief introduction, what you do, and a little bit of your thoughts on data breach, GDPR. It's very relevant to data breach, and then we'll go over to you, Darren, and then to you.
Yes, I am in the government affairs team, and we have been very involved in the GDPR discussion for a long time, basically a couple of years at least, but even before. And obviously government affairs does policy, does relationship with governments and with the regulators, so we're very much at the center of this storm.
Excellent. Darren, over to you, sir. Darren Thomson.
Hi, yeah, I'm Darren Thomson. I'm Symantec's Chief Technology Officer in Europe, Middle East and Africa. I run a small team of cyber professionals who engage typically at the executive level in our customers and our partners to shape security strategy. So that's kind of the role.
Okay.
GDPR has been a bit of a gift in some ways to us. You know, the security purist in me would kind of suggest that this shouldn't be too difficult because we should have been doing it anyway.
Very true.
And so, so we engage alongside Giampiero here with our clients to again, try and make continuous improvement programs for risk and for security and privacy, as opposed to promote the idea of tactical projects.
Got it. George, over to you, sir. A brief introduction.
Hi, I'm George Patsis, as you said. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Obrela Security Industries. Our mission is to keep our customers' business in business, literally. That's what we wake up every morning for. We try to let them do what they do best, and we try to keep them protected, safe, and in business.
Excellent. Focus of today is breach. That word has been given a significance due to GDPR around breach notification, etc. But we're going to discuss, and this is the opportunity for those listening in to ask questions, and we're going to discuss different technologies, different approaches, and different mindsets to actually why breach notification detection is so important. So Darren, if I may start with you, sir. Symantec does a lot of stuff, right? And I know what it does, but I guess in a nutshell, if you may, on breach notification detection, and I'm going to have to use a couple of interesting words such as AI, machine learning. Those are the buzzwords in infosecurity, so I've got to use them. What are you doing, and how does it all come together?
Yeah, so we heavily focus on what we refer to as termination points in security. So those are the places where you've got the ability to stop data, at least momentarily, and analyze that data in depth. So at the network packet level, that would be a proxy, for example. So we have a technology around proxy, both in the cloud and on-premise. Email is another good example of where data would terminate. An endpoint, of course, is yet another example. And now the cloud, through CASB solutions, etc., the cloud application is somewhere else. So we kind of start there. Our portfolio is very much focused on getting those things right. Very importantly, the portfolio also looks after information as well, though. So we have a data loss prevention solution, we have encryption technology, two-factor authentication, those kind of things. We've been on a mission in the last kind of 4 years or so to tie all of that together. We've created an open bus architecture, and so those technologies, all of our technologies now hook into that. They talk to one another. The data that they output, breach notification maybe, is correlated and prioritized, and very, very importantly, that's an open platform. So we have well over 100 partners, many of which are here at the show, that also hook into our platform and create complementary services to the things that we already do.
Can I expand a little bit on that? When you mean open, What does that mean to you and to someone listening in? They've invested in a technology set or a provider. What does open exactly mean?
So we've created something called the Integrated Cyber Defense Exchange. That's essentially an open bus. It relies on a very, very comprehensive schema and leverages lots of industry standards, STIX being an example.
Right.
What that allows is a couple of things. First of all, when our engineering teams are developing something, they can code to that standard interface, and they can interface to the other products in our portfolio. So we derive a kind of 1 + 1 = 3 algorithm from that.
Right.
Very importantly though, one of our biggest assets is our global intelligence network. We've been creating and collecting security telemetry for 20 years now. We have something like 180 million endpoints under protection, 80 million proxies out there, all feeding this global intelligence. From a partner or a customer's perspective, when they hook into this open bus architecture, they can derive the benefits from that data as well. So we've opened up our data essentially to third parties and partners.
Okay, thank you, Darren. John, I'm going to go to you briefly if you don't mind. So we're discussing technology, process, procedures. What, in your opinion, when you talk to your customers, what do you feel is their primary requirement when it comes to breach detection?
Well, we find out more and more that customers are investing heavily onto the prevention aspect of cybersecurity. They buy whatever is on the shelf, trying to block everything from happening. But literally, this is, mathematically, if you like, or statistically, statistics say that you will be a victim no matter what. If you study engineering, every technology will fail at least once in its lifetime, independently of the complexity or the sophistication of the security involved. So we should be prepared for something that will happen. It's inevitable. Nobody is informed into that direction. Everybody tries to stop everything from happening and exclude any possibility of happening. What we should be doing is to rather being prepared and address things fast and block things from becoming more serious. And this is something which is missing from the market right now. So my suggestion to our customers is you have a budget, you should balance that budget between prevention and detection, and not only prevention. And if you do that, then your budget becomes more rationalized in terms of prevention. You don't have to buy the best firewall if you can identify when something goes wrong very early.
Okay, sorry, I was just looking at some questions coming in. Giampiero, GDPR, and I know you talk about dealing with government, but also regulation. I know listeners listening in, I understand, yes, breach notification, breach detection, but how important is all of this when you actually are attacked, right? What happens? What's the thought process? It's a long but short answer.
Short answer. Obviously, the breach notification is a moment of possibly panic,
right?
Because already a breach is panic bound, and then you have the GDPR mandate, which obliges you to do something about it. So, and that something could be nothing in terms of notification, because if you have data that have been, say, exfiltrated, but they are unintelligible. For instance, you have strong encryption, then you don't need to notify, as simple as that. There's a bit of myth about having to notify anyway. That's not true. What you have to do anyway is always to record your data breach, even if you don't notify. But if you have to notify, which means the data, the fact that the data has been exfiltrated poses some risk to the data subjects. At that point, you have to notify the Data Protection Authority within 72 hours.
Understand.
And that's the point.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a question come in. I'm going to pause on that question and talk about something we were briefly discussing a little bit earlier before we went. There is no green room here, but let's call it a green room for all practical purposes. So early, not only detection, but to me something's very close to all our hearts, is early prediction, right? Darren, if you don't mind starting with that, is it possible right now? Or how can we kind of collectively as an industry try to get to predictive incident response rather than waiting for one of the daily newspapers to tell us something is wrong?
Yeah. I'll begin by saying, I'm a firm believer that the pace of innovation that's required in the security industry right now is not where it needs to be. If we think about the sort of race to digitization that's going on in every vertical market, whether that be, motor cars or retail or banking, whatever it might be, these businesses are racing to digitize, they're racing to connect. They're excited about the analytics and the data they can derive from their customers and the value that can in turn bring to their businesses. That pace of change, I would suggest, is currently outpacing the pace of change in security. I don't see at the show this year, I don't see a whole lot of radical innovation. I see a lot of incremental innovation. There's kind of good stuff happening. We've been doing that for a decade.
Things are improving.
Yeah, they're improving, but I don't think they're improving quickly enough, right? So, and back to the point, I think one of the things that we need to strive to achieve as an industry is we need to get to a point that I often describe as left of bang. So at the moment we're an industry that's very focused on right of bang. If bang is the breach, there's a timeline running through that breach. Something bad happens, we react, we run around, we mitigate, hopefully we improve things for the future. I think this industry needs to take us left of bang. So rather than the incident that we describe being something bad happened, the incident should be the mere possibility of a breach. Now how do we get there? I think there's a number of things in play here, but essentially I think we need to start thinking about using the power of the crowd. We need to start thinking about the data we can derive from that crowd, and that crowd, by the way, is our users and our devices, right? Yeah. And we need to develop algorithms that allow us to make those predictions based on a global telemetry. I don't think localized telemetry gets us there. I mean, it could help, but I think a global telemetry is very, very important. And that's the kind of mission we're on at Symantec right now. We have this huge global intelligence network. As I said earlier, we're bringing tools together. They're correlating and prioritizing. And to your last question, can we do it yet? We're starting to see the green shoots of this happening right now.
Oh, very interesting.
We're developing technologies now that, for example, can very quickly tell you on your network who are your riskiest users. Who are the users that are likely to cause you a problem? Where are the devices that are most likely to be affected? So that's the beginnings, I think, of getting to this predictive world.
Excellent. George, any thoughts on trying to start to predict incidents rather than, as you're saying, I like the thing about being right on the bang being the breach. What about, you do similar kind of services,
well,
isn't it?
If you decompose the word predict means that see earlier. Okay, so you still have to see. And to see, you need to have visibility. Now, in terms of Obrela, when one of our core services is based on analyzing big volumes of data. And we don't do that, on an isolation per customer. We do that collectively for all of our clients. So although there is a multi-tenancy embedded in the service, every single customer can see their own issues, their own threats. But what we get out of this, because we put all the data under a single unstructured database, is that we can have visibility and we can have an asset which is called collective intelligence. What that means is that if you, for example, are a victim of a propagating attack into an industry which is called energy, and you are the first victim, then we are in a position to update and inform all of our customers which belong in the same path of that propagating attack well in advance. So that's predicting, because we can share information early with people that were not affected initially. And that is something which happens with malware or malware detection engines. We try to apply that as a service as part of the detection and response.
It's very interesting you do that. So we run a UK government certified course called CIPR, Cyber Incident Planning and Response. And one of the things we do in this exercise with the client, with senior executives, is trying to get them to start thinking, do you know your threat actors? It's not good to say, oh, nation states are after me. Not good enough. Or the other one is the insider threat. Really? Who are the threat actors, right? The other thing is, what is the threat actor going to do to cripple your business? If you don't know as an executive what is going to cripple your business, how can you start predicting what the threat adversary is going to do? It gets a really interesting discussion going when we do the CIPR course, because you're forcing them to think, how would you destroy your business? And many of them are kind of like, there's a bit of silence that happens when these executives are on the session, because many of them are not really understanding the value of visibility, big data. In fact, on that question, and we'll still come to this one, but there's another question that came in, and I get asked this, I have a response, but I wanted your opinions. So we keep saying big data, visibility. I'm a massive supporter of visibility, coverage, right? Truly, in your experience, is it correct to say the better the coverage, the better the visibility? What are your thoughts, Darren?
Yeah, well, I think, look, any algorithm that's written in sort of machine learning circles is only as good as the data that it looks at. So sure, a breadth and a coverage is definitely important. Going back to my termination points earlier, I could derive somewhat of a comprehensive solution if I was looking at the endpoints in my organization. But if I'm doing that and not considering the network layer, not considering email, where, let's face it, phishing is happening and that's very prevalent right now. Yeah. So if we're not comprehensively thinking about all of those termination points, we're not going to have as good a data set as we could have.
True.
Now, what I would caveat that with, though, is sizes and everything, right? So the quality of that data is very, very, very important. And so it's interesting, I look around and see vendors talking about the amount of data they have sometimes in whatever, terabytes or whatever.
Yeah.
To me, that matters a bit less than, number one, the quality of the algorithm that will be run against that data, and secondly, to what extent that data has been cleansed, to what extent that data has been deduplicated and sanitized. Normalized, right? Yeah. So you really want all of these things, these kind of legs of a stool. You want great algorithms, you want people that understand what they're seeing when they look at the data, and you want great data. That's the.
Sorry, I just remembered one more thing. Sorry, time sync.
Right. Yeah.
Something so tiny.
Yep.
Right, can affect the whole integrity, because if you don't sync your time across your digital estate, you pretty much have really bad data.
Yeah, if I'm making predictive risk decisions based on old data, you're not predictive anymore. You're predicting something that already happened, right? So that's absolutely
very, very true. Brother, what's your day? I'll come to you after that, Giampiero.
Well, your question is a very difficult one to answer, really.
I understand.
Because the more the coverage, the more the data. So it comes down to accuracy versus coverage and speed. So we need both. The truth is that we need to be accurate and we need to be very fast. And to do that, we need to add context in the content. And to add context in the content, we need to put the risk in the picture. For example, when we do analyze data, currently, all the competitors, all the market players are focused on technology-related data. Yeah. There is no context in that. When we see a profile added on a server, we don't know if this is a privilege escalation, if it's a malware, or if it's a legitimate business as usual process. By adding, however, business context into that exact data element, business context coming from the workflows, from the business. And for example, what we do is we integrate with the workflow engines. So if you do operate an identity and access management, we do get the data from the workflows. So we know if there was an authorization or not for that profile to be added. So we eliminate that information from the correlation or from the analytics. And we decrease the overheads on our machines, and we are more accurate when we escalate.
Now, something very important, and the UK government, and I'm not on the record many times saying governments are great, but the UK government's got something really interesting. You may have heard of it. It's called the GPG 13, the Good Practice Guide 13, right? I think it's a freely available document. I'm not going to comment on whether, but you can go Google it. It's GPG 13. And it's one of the best documents I've read. If you can't sleep, it's a good read also. But it's actually a really good document on log management, right? So if you haven't taken a look at it, those listening in, and later on, GPG 13, very good read on how do you put context, how do you actually evaluate the quality of data, and making sure that you get value from all this petabytes of, or the word being roamed around these days is zettabytes of log data, right?
I think something else I would add is, I think there's a step before any of this that I see many organizations miss. And that's got to do with good risk management practice, and within that, preferred risk posture. So I've always made the argument in any kind of risk, but it's definitely relevant in IT risk and security, that you can't possibly create a good risk management strategy unless you've decided already how much risk you're prepared to take. Because once you start to build a risk register and those risks start to appear on an impact probability chart, how do you know what's acceptable risk, what risk should be shared, what risk should be mitigated? So we encourage organizations, even before we get to strategizing around data sets and that kind of stuff, who are you? Who do you want to be? What level of risk are you prepared to take?
Yeah.
That's a board level discussion, right?
Very much.
And I'm lucky enough to work with everything from Formula One racing teams right through to banks, right through to local government organizations. I can tell you they do not have the same risk posture. Formula One teams throw human beings into 250 mile an hour racing cars. That's a very different attitude to risk to a local government firm.
Yeah.
So that's where I would encourage people to start. Even before they look at the risks themselves, who are you? Who do you want to be? What's acceptable at board level? And then there are no nasty surprises later when you fail to mitigate something that you should have done.
Excellent.
And actually,
Giampiero,
if I can say, the notion of risk is really much embedded in the GDPR discussion.
Very much.
That's exactly what companies should ask themselves. In the same way, in terms of security, how much risk do I want to take in terms of compliance for the company, but also more specifically from the regulatory point of view, how much risk do I want the data subjects whose data I am treating, how much risk do I want them to take? Because if something happens to the data, then the risk is with the subjects. And when that risk becomes high, you are in a situation where, for instance, you have to notify the breach. In fact, you have to notify also to the data subject themselves, which is no good for the reputation aspect. If it starts to become public, that becomes really painful. And we have many examples in the recent past, actually, of companies that have been, knocked down by reputational issue because they had a data breach.
Now, very important on that visibility before we move on. Ask yourself, and I hope everyone on the panel agrees, one of the challenges is, say you have been breached, right? If you don't have maximum visibility, the question is, you have two options, or maybe three, I don't know, but one, you either say, I don't know what happened, right? Or you kind of put in a bit of masala and, and kind of make it up. Or the third option is if you have maximum visibility, then you can actually tell the regulator and your customers and clients, you know what, this happened, things happen, but actually we know what happened, and this is how we responded, and this is how we resolve the issue. And this is really critical, because if you don't focus on, yes, quality, but visibility, you really are post-breach, on the right side of the bang. What are you going to do?
My observation working with customers over the last couple of years on that visibility question is very mature organizations will often have good visibility at a technical level. So they'll have good visibility of what was the piece of malware that came in, what devices did that affect, how do we mitigate that technical risk. They have a less good visibility of the impact on information. This is where something like GDPR becomes really important, right? So when you ask a mature organization, okay, what happened? What was the breach?
What happened?
Who did it? How did it happen? What did it affect? They're quite good at those answers. They're not so good at what was the impact on the data and what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where legislation and regulation like GDPR can really help people start to take an information-centric focus on this problem, because that's, in my experience, missing in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, totally.
GDPR is very prescriptive in terms of what you have to tell the regulator and also the data subjects about what happened, what kind of data have been impacted, how many people have been impacted, and then what kind of risk they have, what mitigation has been taken from a company point of view, what mitigation should the data subjects take, for instance, change your passwords. Right? So you have to be very detailed in that.
Yeah. But importantly, as Darren has also pointed out, is understanding the impact, not just the technical visibility, but actually understanding the business context, as George, you were saying, is understanding that impact on the information, right, and the data subject. I've got a question that we've been holding on to. Okay, whoever this individual is, well, it says, it is all very well having tools, we need tools, but vendors do not provide means to integrate their products to a single reporting or operational dashboard. How would they recommend the integration of different vendor products? It's a good question. It's a good question. Darren, do you want to take it first?
I'd love to, because it
Go on.
plays right into my hands.
Yes.
So look, we've been working at Symantec for 4 years, again, on this open framework, these
Right.
open standards, this bus architecture that allows not only our products, but now hundreds of other products, literally hundreds, to hook in with a dashboard, right?
Okay.
So now that dashboard can be our dashboard, and that can be somebody else's
Somebody
dashboard.
else.
One of our very close partners in this area is Splunk.
Okay.
They do a fantastic job at visualizing and that kind of stuff, and so that's your preference, that's your preference. Chances are, whichever your favorite sort of method of dashboarding is, we can hook that into the framework. So this is why the platform architecture is so important. You know, there's a couple of things I'd add to it. So number one, you know, I talk to CISOs all the time that are starting to describe, ironically, their security tools now as one of their biggest risks. How ironic is that, right? The very things we're purchasing to protect us are now disguising breaches. There are so many tools, they're disparate, they're all outputting information, log files and alerts, and the SOC analyst can't see the wood for the trees. And so this is another very, very good reason to create an open framework that all kinds of tools can hook into, report centrally to your listeners' point there, and correlate and prioritize incidents.
Before I go to you, George, and Symantec's going to buy me a coffee. I'm just kidding. But the reality is, as you say, in my experience, I think majority of vendors are actually doing the right thing.
Yep.
You know, that there are some exceptions, no names for now, but majority of them don't necessarily only want you to have one ecosystem, because you have other investments, etc. My challenge, and I kind of challenge the listeners also, is when I see this with my clients, I think the appetite sometimes is, oh, there's going to be too much work to integrate everything. You know, oh, do we have to pay professional services? Realities of life, but if you do want to get everything working, then maybe there has to be some professional services element. You know, and that's the hard truth. But from my experience, majority of vendors today are definitely, you know, trying to give the maximum value to the customer. If they have spent the money on Symantec, then they don't have to change Symantec, but they can plug in, you know, something else.
Yeah.
You know, but yes, there may be some work to get the job done, and it may cost a little bit of money.
That's why we put a lot of engineering effort into creating a schema, right, to minimize the amount of work. Sure, there's going to be some work necessary, but what we've not done here is just publish an API.
Yeah.
What a lot of vendors do is they publish an API and they say, we're open,
Go and do it.
come and talk to us, it's all great, right? And what you end up with there is a many-to-many connection problem, you know, a maintenance headache, you know, frankly, a reliability headache as well. So we haven't done that. What we've done is we've created a fabric and a schema. So it's not many-to-many, it's one-to-one to the bus architecture. That then correlates, prioritizes data, moves it on to whichever application is necessary.
What do you see, George, in terms of integration? It's a good question, but in terms of, in your own outfit, integration when you talk to customers, is that a challenge? Is that an opportunity? What are your thoughts?
Well, we are a service provider,
Okay.
right? What we do is we provide cyber risk management as a service, and we think that's the evolution for a managed detection and response market, which is booming as we speak. But managed detection and response is focused on technology only, and customers need much more. As I explained, we are now in a position where we can also monitor what the business is doing from a business context. We are able to understand what the procedures are, which are run on the back end. To your previous question, for example, when a breach is happening, we also know which procedures were followed, which security response or remediation procedures, or who authorized. So we put the business context on the logging or the systems coming from the technology, and that then we can present something more credible to any regulator or auditor that comes in. But I think that the most important is to be able to create and streamline the business based on workflows. If you can do that, at the end of the day, you see that all the products, all the vendors, all the systems that are provided by the market today, offered by the market, are essentially based on a workflow engine and a data analysis system, and then just a visualization on a reporting or something like that. So if you have those two elements, and you make them interoperable open, as previously mentioned, then you can create use cases for access control, for identity management, for managed detection and response, for analyzing data, dashboards, risk management. You can create everything. I'm saying all this because I think the market is currently consolidating. We are entering into a phase, into a stage where all products will be, the market is craving for consolidation and centralization. You know, on average, there are more than 70 different products per customer. So that's where we are. And I think that's the future.
Yeah, I know, it's going to be interesting because, yeah, there are 70 products, but more than 70 in some cases. Will it ever be consolidated? I don't know. It's an interesting headache.
That was the market 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Before ERPs came up, before SAP came up and dominated the market, there was an accounting, an HR system, an invoicing system, a billing system.
Yeah.
And then one new guy came up and says, this is it. It does everything. You can buy models. Correct. And you can, work with it.
It goes into the analogy of, do you put all your eggs, in one basket?
But I think you can have both, right? I think I totally agree. I think this industry is ripe for radical change right now. I think that radical change is consolidation. It is integration. I think that's what the customer is craving. I talk to customers all the time that are saying, look, all eggs in one basket isn't necessarily a good strategy, but given where I am right now, I'd if I could have 3 baskets, that would be okay. Yeah. I've got 70 baskets, right? But also I think you can have your cake and eat it. I mean, if you take a look at Symantec strategy, again, we are giving away a bus. We spent 3 years developing that schema and that bus architecture. We give that away for free for people to hook into. If you want to use our products, great, we'd love you to use our products, we think they're good. But if you want to use somebody else's, you can do that as well. So we're trying to disrupt the market here. We're trying to say, look, you can have both. You can make the use of our data, make the use of our bus, use whatever technologies you want to use. We happen to think we have some great ones, but you're getting both. You're getting consolidation in that way, but also you're not expecting everybody to throw their eggs into one basket.
This brings up an interesting question, Giampiero, is, again, coming back to regulation, compliance, GDPR, given the disparate nature, the 70, 80 baskets that everyone is dealing with, then visibility and kind of getting the value out of the data in time for, to make sure that you're compliant, it's not a really easy task.
No, and actually visibility is one of the key words when you talk about compliance with GDPR. Shadow IT is one of the big nightmares, actually. Shadow IT is all those apps that reside in the cloud and that people use without the knowledge of the IT. We have done some surveys over time, and we found out that the enterprise average CIO tells us that we have probably something between 30 and 40 apps that run in the cloud for us. Wrong. When our specialists went and found out we found out something like above 1,000, 1,200, 1,500. Yeah. So what are these apps doing? What kind of data they are treating? Are they personal data? Are they sensitive personal data? Where is it going?
And they're not in those 70 baskets.
And exactly.
We are talking
totally
about.
They're
totally separate, living in their own kind of ecosystem.
And by the way, anybody that thinks that cloud is a basket is delusional. The cloud itself is another 70 baskets.
70 baskets, yeah.
And obviously, when you have all this data going around in the cloud without any control by the IT, you not only have a problem in terms of technology, you have a problem in terms of compliance. Because that data could be exfiltrated, could be how secure is the data for the provider of that app. You have no idea. People download apps to do very legitimate things. For instance, convert files from, say, a PDF to an Excel. You find dozens of apps that do that. But what's in that PDF? Is it clinical data? Yeah. You are absolutely in breach of the GDPR.
It's a very important topic and often not discussed. Just to summarize a little bit, it's this whole thing about having so many technology sets and avoiding the one basket scenario. But as we were just discussing, is don't aim for one basket, but at least aim for 3 or 4, rather than having 70 or 80 or more. Because there's always going to be this challenge, and the dogged aim of, I've got to consolidate everything.
Well, it could be very, on layers. There must be a management layer. There's no management layer. There's no single thing that you can use to know what is your risk, what is your compliance, what is your exposure, and what's your threat. Simple things. So everything lies below that. Firewalling, network systems, network security, IDSs, we need to manage those. We can't replace them, but we need to manage them horizontally, okay? And that's I think what's missing in the market.
I'm going to touch on something, again, quite close to everything that we're talking about, but often wrongly considered the icing on the cake, is orchestration, right? Is my opinion. Orchestration should not be the icing on the cake. You need to consider it much before, rather than waiting for consolidation and everything else, and then we will get orchestration.
By design.
Right, so kind of leave it open to, maybe start with you, Darren, if you don't mind. What are your thoughts on the importance of orchestration, and what can organizations do to try to get into this, to me, one of the most important missing pieces if you want to get incident response correct?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I tend to think of orchestration and automation hand in hand, right?
Orchestration.
And I think together they at least form part of the jigsaw puzzle of what I describe as radical innovation in security. We have got to automate more. It's very well documented how few skills there are on this planet right now capable of dealing with these problems. We know that people are very expensive. We know that the nature of the attack now is so fast and furious and multifaceted that no one human being could possibly get their head around it. So we've got to automate more, we've got to create workflow, etc. I think a mistake that a lot of people are making right now, though, is they're trying to jump to, frankly, quite complicated automation regimes, relying on maybe machine learning algorithms, etc. But they haven't got the basics right yet. If I go back to last year and WannaCry and that kind of stuff, the organisations that were breached and affected by that had not even thought of the basics. They were not patching their systems in a pragmatic way, let alone an automated or orchestrated way, right? So I think we need to go back to basics on some of this stuff. And my experience of workflow, for example, and orchestration tools are that if you take some very important, prioritized, but fairly simple use cases and get those right, you start to create a discipline in your organization for doing things that way. And so as you learn to do other things, you automatically start to think about, well, what might that workflow look like? I don't see an awful lot of that in the SOC right now. When I visit customers, every customer I go to, I could write a different paper on how they do patch management, on how they do antivirus, on how they do endpoint. And that's wrong. So we've got to get back to basics. We've got to think about what are those basic use cases and workflows, start to orchestrate and automate those things, and I think that will create a culture for doing things that way in security. This reminds me an awful lot from 15, 20 years ago of ITIL.
I wasn't born then.
Me neither. My dad told me.
I'm just kidding.
but it reminds me an awful lot of, we used to think about, okay, how are we going to do change management?
Yeah.
How are we going to do, revision control? This was ITIL, right?
Yeah.
Where's the ITIL for security? If there is one, it's certainly not universal, and people aren't sort of coding to that. So I think we've got to start with the basics there.
Your thoughts on automation, orchestration?
Well, you just brought up a great example of why analyzing data is not enough if the context is not the proper one. The security response and orchestration is about putting the human element into the equation. When you identify something, someone needs to do something, and when something comes again, why you should do that twice. So it's a simple thing of how you can put analytics and data and embed that with a human element, and the only way to do that is with using procedures. And to automate procedures, you need workflows. And workflows is about tickets, it's about really everything that we do in the business on a daily basis. So doing both, it's the solution. If you do only one, then everything else, it happens ad hoc on a initiative of a single entity, and it's not repeatable, it's not effective, it costs too much, and at the end of the day, it's forgotten.
I'm going to look at the camera and say something. If you remember that plane we discussed, the fact that all of us are on the plane, or your CEOs on the plane, the question you have to ask yourself is, if you did have a hack, would you want to phone IT support and then wait for them to raise a ticket? Or would you want automation to kick in, orchestration, detect, fix, recover? You answer that question and you got, hopefully you know what we're talking about. Because I think that drives home that radical change. You've got to have a little bit of, bandwidth to try automation. It's not the nirvana, but seriously, on that plane, I would love to have automation to do something rather than just
There is the AI and there is the HI, the human intelligence.
Yes.
No, we cannot do anything without HI, because at the end of the day, someone has to take a decision about going one direction or the other direction.
I understand.
So one of the basic principles used on the defense, fight, aircrafts, it's risk management in real time. A fighter pilot has a system which actually measures the risks in terms of the engines, environment and everything. It takes decisions based on that system. That's the only solution to go forward.
Incidentally, when the legislator of GDPR in particular put together the legislation, they also discussed the state of the art.
Right.
You
Very
cannot be
interesting.
compliant in privacy if you don't have a state of the art in security.
That's a very
Okay,
interesting
so
point.
and this is
Yes.
something that so you cannot be running obsolete security. You'll be in breach. They will give you some very serious sanctions.
No names, but organizations are starting to talk about going back to paper to avoid GDPR.
Yeah, that's a wrong approach anyway.
I would love somebody to define state of the art. I'd love, I'm not sure what that means.
Excellent. I think we've been told on one side of my ear that we've got to start wrapping up. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go to each panelist. George, I'll start with you. Maximum a minute of your final thoughts on, I know we could be here maybe for several hours actually, on incident security, data breach, and then I'll go to you, Darren, and then Giampiero, and I'll kind of close. Go on, sir. George from Obrela.
Well, I think that there was a great discussion, first of all, and if I would say something very simple, I think cybersecurity or information security, it's not only about technology. It's about integrating technology with people and procedures. This is it, and I think this is where we have to go.
Excellent, George. George Patsis, thank you from Obrela. Darren Thomson. Darren, sir.
Yeah, I would just encourage everybody to stop thinking in terms of security project and start thinking in terms of security program. Difference between those two things in my mind is a project has a beginning, a middle and an end, and a program is continuous. And so I think we need to see more cyber defense programs that are constantly analyzing the threat landscape. They're constantly thinking people, process, technology. They're evolving those things. They are spawning projects based on prioritization, right? And they're governing those projects as well. I would encourage that approach. I see way too many disparate projects going on that aren't joined up, and that really doesn't help with any part of security, least of all breach notification or something like that.
Darren Thomson, Symantec, thank you. Giampiero.
Absolutely, and this is what actually GDPR is about. GDPR is not something that ends on the 25th of May, it didn't end there, it started there, and it's an ongoing kind of situation, and only a program which is technology, but also obviously the people, the procedures, and all the whole compliance discussion is there. By the way, GDPR is not the only one that is on the horizon. There are lots of other legislation. The NIS directive on operators of critical infrastructure is one, and so on. So you will have lots of things that will go exactly in a program kind of framework.
Giampiero, Nanni from Symantec, thank you. My final thoughts on this, in addition to everything else that the respected panelists have said, is CIPR. What I mean by that is planning and response. And it needs to be also focused on by executive layer. Because if the management doesn't appreciate what it takes to detect, what it takes to plan, what it takes to respond, the techies can do everything they want, but the management need to take charge, need to understand what playbooks are, need to get involved. I think it's no longer an excuse that cyber or IT is just a techie issue. It's a human issue, it's a management issue. I want to thank you, thank the panelists and thank everyone listening in. Infosecurity Europe 2018. Thank you to Symantec and Obrela. Thank you.